Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, episode number 97 with Jeff Young, who is a fellow higher ed podcaster and reporter at EdSurge, but a big fan of theirs as well as a big fan of Jeff's. So it was a real treat to talk with him, to learn more about his story and his journey into podcasting and some of the stuff that he is working on currently. So definitely ways to connect with him and the work that he is doing in the show notes. In particular, the EdSurge Podcast is doing an amazing series, really getting into the front lines of colleges, pandemic responses and reopenings, talking with faculty and students, doing these audio diaries. They just released the first episode this week, so please go check that out at the EdSurge Podcast in your favorite podcast player. They will be releasing episodes in this series every other week throughout the fall term, in addition to their regular programming in the off weeks. So, I can't say enough good things about the EdSurge Podcast in general, and after checking out this first episode of this series, just so intrigued and so excited to see where it leads and hear about the experiences firsthand of faculty and students at campuses all across the country. So please do reach out to Jeff if you want to keep the conversation going about anything we talked about in this episode or that new series that they're kicking off this week. Just so excited that we get to share this conversation out. And after this brief message from our sponsor, this is episode number 97 with the one and only Jeff Young. This episode is sponsored by DegreeMe, a one-stop college research tool for students. If you work for a college or university, you'll want to learn all about their ability to connect you with the right students at a budget-friendly price. To find out more, please visit degree.me/HEG. All right, so thank you so much, Jeff, for jumping on for the podcast here. Super excited to talk with you as just a fan of your work and your podcast, just to hear more about your journey and the work that you're doing and everything. So we'll start out there, as we always do. If you want to introduce yourself and give a brief overview of your professional journey and how you got to be where you are today.
Well, hey, thanks, Dustin. No, it's great to great to be on this. Thanks for having me. And yeah, I am at EdSurge now, but I have been covering mainly higher education and kind of innovation in higher education for actually like 20 plus years. And it is, is something that clearly I have gotten deep down in the rabbit hole in, and it continues to fascinate me. But I started off, I would say, first of all, my interest was in the kind of like tech culture that when I graduated from college way back, it's kind of hard to believe these days, but since I've been watching this space so long, there was this time before the internet was such a part of everyone's lives and before social media even existed. And there was this emerging kind of like, and especially in higher education, when I was in college, there was this sense that this was the frontier and this was, where the action was as far as like, where the world was changing. And I was just really fascinated by kind of internet culture and wanting to also, and in college, I really wanted to be a journalist, worked at the student paper. And I was really interested in, it just felt like an area that wasn't that covered, oddly, which was the kind of tech revolution. Though, of course, there were, Wired existed and there were plenty of CNET and places, but not always covering the kind of culture and kind of and ideas around it. Now, again, this all sounds like, crazy now because it is such a part of our lives, but that is how I kind of came to really want to be in that and covering that world. And then when I graduated, I ended up, basically ended up at the Chronicle of Higher Education as my first job in Washington, D.C. But which was wonderful. I ended up getting an internship there while I was still in college, and that's how I got my foot in the door there. But the internship program at the Chronicle is just an astounding training program, I would say. And I think you'll see a lot of people have come out of there that are just incredible journalists that have, that's just, they take it seriously. And the person that was my supervisor, Lawrence B. Miller, is just one of the best in the business and just a huge figure in my own path. But he is somebody that is super interested in the kind of culture and systems around what you're covering beyond just the just the facts at the top of AP style on something, and the people and what's really shaping, what's changing. And so I ended up just really falling in love with the place and getting hired and covering really technology and the internet culture from the perch of what's happening at colleges and higher ed. And so I was able to interview all these people that were thought leaders before TED Talks existed, before some of these, kind of things that we take for granted now, but we're, basically being able to, go to like the Berkman Center at Harvard and write about their conferences and to be kind of at a lot of the events that were taking place to really shape the internet that colleges were very involved with. And some of them were almost like being, when you're a beat reporter, you end up having, you cover the things nobody wants to go to, right? Like if for an education reporter at the K-12 level, that's like going to all the school board meetings late at night. But for me, it was actually going to things like the ICANN meeting. People probably don't even know what that is, but they set, the governance board for setting like internet domains. And there was a big controversy over, whether they were going to open it up beyond just like .com and .org and .mil. Uh-huh. And these were where some of the biggest, kind of thinkers from like MIT and Harvard and other places around the country that had sort of like Michigan and like places that had invented the internet, so to speak, that had, kind of really brought up the internet, were having these big debates that were still not really that covered. They were, but, they weren't, those kinds of decisions that they were making were kind of shaping the rise of the internet and the opening up to commercialization. And so long story short, that's kind of where, and I also covered some of the policy issues. For the Chronicle, I wrote a big cover story about the Communications Decency Act, which was, a law that is really continued to shape, free speech on the internet. And I covered the arguments before the Supreme Court and sat behind Nina Totenberg from NPR and was in the press gallery, like covering that story. And so it's really been, it really was an exciting story. And I ended up staying at the Chronicle for like 20 years. and then in the last few years, for all kinds of reasons, including personal ones, my wife grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota. So we wanted to move here with our two young kids and really kind of were interested in moving out of DC and ended up not able to do that while staying at the Chronicle, and found that EdSurge was trying to expand their higher ed coverage, which they had mainly been K-12, covering really tech and innovation in the K-12 space, and the business of EdTech. And that was a really exciting opportunity to come to EdSurge and help shape what higher ed coverage here means. And so that's what I'm doing now. And one of the things that I was very keen on, and I'm sure we'll get to this in a second, which is the podcast. So maybe I'll just stop for a minute. And but I think that's the quick path of like being somebody who wanted to cover tech, finding college a really fascinating platform to do it, and then I will say, like, along the way, really falling in love with like looking at the education space and understanding how changes there are happening in a way that I think a lot of people broadly may not realize how much change is happening, and that those changes are to higher education and to K-12 too, but I've mainly covered higher ed, that those are really an interesting story right now.
Yeah, and a story that just continues to unfold, certainly with the current moment. But yeah, I mean, it's just fascinating. I mean, yeah, just that longitudinal kind of experience that you've had of really just like the initial seeds of kind of what we could see now as, the proliferation of digital education and just sort of, representing these venerable higher institution brands in digital spaces and stuff. Certainly started with just like domains and just like, yeah, like the decency of how we communicate online and different things like that, of just like, those were those initial seeds. So it's just really fascinating that you've kind of really been there from the beginning. But yeah, I mean, certainly bringing us to now and all the experiences that you've had over all those years, a big chunk of what you're doing now as you're exploring the role technology is playing in education is through the EdSurge podcast. So I'm just always curious, I guess, just because I know some folks are kind of like, they've always had the hobby, so now it's just a good way to like utilize those skills, or if it was just sort of like a serendipitous, like happenstance kind of thing that maybe is like a little bit more different that way. So yeah, I'm just curious, like what inspired you to start the podcast, or just how it came to be? Because I know it's been going strong now for a good chunk of time. So I'm curious of kind of the origin story for the podcast.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and EdSurge Podcast is more than 300 episodes. And thanks. So we do think going strong. So I guess I really did get fascinated by audio while I was at the Chronicle. And I would say that one of the things that was really, that I did a lot of at the Chronicle was trying to encourage news story formats while I was there, because I was covering this world and I was talking to all these people that were so excited about things. And I have to say, like, I was also like, I want to try some of this, in my journalism. So I started the first blog at the Chronicle. Again, this all sounds like ridiculous because, that was back when media organizations were really dabbling with blogs. So we covered, a technology blog at the Chronicle that was called Wired Campus that lived on for quite a while. And when podcasting had its kind of first wave of kind of, interest, it was so clunky. A lot of people, these apps that we have on our phones that we take for granted, the way we get to podcasts, that doesn't exist. You had to kind of load them onto your iPod. It was, I had trouble doing it, and I was an enthusiast. And nevertheless, like, I was like, this audio stuff is just so rich and intimate and powerful, and these stories, this format is so interesting. And so I ended up doing a training at Duke University's Center for Documentary Studies, which I recommend. It was wonderful. It's like a week-long training that the Chronicle sent me to kind of learn, how to start to think about telling stories in audio. And we started, we were sort of looking for an idea for a podcast, and then there was a columnist who wanted to write a column for the Chronicle many years ago, and his name was Warren Arbogast, and he wanted to start a column. And we were in a meeting, and someone was like, this would work better as a podcast. This doesn't, what he wants to do is kind of, have a chat with somebody and have this like dialogue. Again, this all sounds like hilarious, right? Because it's like, wait, we figured out like, two people sitting in a microphone, like this was like an emerging, like huge popular thing in the world of podcasting. And so we're like, we're going to do this. So I was a co-host with Warren Arbogast on something we called Tech Therapy. And that ran for, at first it was my colleague, Scott Carlson, who did it. And then I took over as the hosting job after just being behind the scenes producing it. So that was really my toe in the water for podcasting. And then I ended up doing, I had the great fortune of doing a Nieman Fellowship at Harvard in 2016, and was it just was an energizing thing. This is a journalism fellowship where you get to spend an academic year in Cambridge at Harvard. I did a lot of classes. You can kind of audit classes at MIT and Harvard through this program. And so I spent a lot of time at the MIT Media Lab, working with some just incredible people thinking about like what's going on in media. And one of the things that I came out of that even more excited about kind of audio and podcasting, which was having its serial moment at that time of, the podcast Serial coming out, and a whole new wave of becoming a mainstream, kind of medium. And so I came back to the Chronicle from that fellowship, and one of the first things I wanted to do was start a podcast. And so we did, it was called Relearning. And we did one season, but I answered this question because this really is the EdSurge podcast as it is now. I started it there because I just felt like, the story of how higher ed is changing, how the higher ed ecosystem and landscape, and not just because of technology. I mean, one of my big things that I've really come to learn as I've covered, I think I first thought of myself as a tech reporter, but increasingly, I think the best stories and the best the most helpful journalism comes out of it by not thinking about starting with tech, but thinking about starting with the issues or the questions that have come up, that are the problems people are trying to solve, and then look at all kinds of the issues, which include the tools often, not always, but also include policy and include culture and include, anthropological looks at like how people are adopting these things. And so it's, and really something journalism is well suited to kind of look at. And I think audio specifically is really well suited to exploring a transitional time, a time where people don't have it all figured out, and there's not a story that's like all good guys and bad guys, and people don't know, and people often in their experiments don't, have their own misgivings maybe about some of the stuff they're doing, which is a really hard, an interesting thing. And so if you can get people to be honest about that journey, and I think audio has a good track record of people kind of feeling comfortable enough to both share that, and then people having an appetite to listen to a longer form piece than say a text story that people might read for a minute, 30 seconds. But if they'll sit with you for half an hour or more on a podcast and really get into it, I mean, that's really exciting. And so when I came to EdSurge, one of my biggest, desires was to make sure that the EdSurge already had a podcast, but it was kind of a mixed format. It had some news at the top of the show, but our stats told us, and we knew from talking to people, that often people wouldn't listen to the show until weeks later. And so it wasn't, those headlines at the top were stale by the time most people got to them. So we ended up taking out the headlines, turning it, really just kind of retooling it as a interview show primarily, and more we're trying to do a mixed format where some weeks it's interviews, some weeks it's kind of a borrowed Planet Money format where, two of us in the newsroom talk to each other and narrate a story with some tape from multiple perspectives, which is great because a lot of these things, there are people with very differing views. For instance, we did a piece on OER just a couple weeks ago with my colleague, Becky Koenig, and we talked to a student who was against a deal that UC Davis was doing that was kind of this inclusive access textbook program. And then we talked to the person at UC Davis in charge of it and really, kind of showing why they're doing it. And so we were able to pull together a piece that's really like an explainer on like, what is this inclusive access idea? Why is it so problematic in some ways? Because it has detractors and lawsuits, and yet it is trying to solve a problem. So we've just been able to, kind of explore use the podcast to just kind of tell the stories we do as we go.
Yeah. Which I will further emphasize that episode was like a really good one because, like you said, it just gave, I think, a really full picture of it versus like, because I guess even my show kind of limited by the fact of like I try to get a lot of different people on, but it's like a conversation with one person at a time. And I think with yours, just covering current events and just all the nuance that you can. And like, I mean, like you said, 30 minutes, like you can get into a lot, especially, if you're bringing on a lot of different people, you can cover a lot of ground in 30 minutes. But yeah, so much great stuff in what you said. And I think it's like, because I certainly like feel this as well of like being in it, of creating a podcast every day. Cause like, I honestly can say like, I kind of have taken for granted your show because you're like, yeah, we have been going strong for like 300 episodes. And I'm like, well, I guess, yeah, I mean, it's been a long time. And like, obviously being in the thick of it, helping to create, that content, it's like, yep, we have definitely done 300 episodes, but like other people might be like, oh, it's just been around for a while. Like, so certainly kudos to you and yours, your team there, kind of doing that hard work because yeah, it's such great stuff and it covers so much ground. I mean, both in K-12 and higher education, which like, obviously are so closely intertwined, but there's certainly a lot of unique things in both spaces and all that. So it's just so much to dig into. So yeah. And I guess, on that really quick, like, anything else just in terms of, I think you've spoken to this a little bit, but, and maybe you'll take maybe the tail end of this question a little bit more, but just sort of like, what does sort of like keep you motivated, keep you energized about like what you enjoy most about it? Because I know I've just recorded with somebody else who's like a higher ed podcaster, and we're speaking sometimes about, those times where it's just like, oh man, I've got to edit this or I got to do that, like all the different pieces of producing and, recording and editing and all that. So, like what keeps you motivated and energized as you continue to explore all these, constantly changing nuances and stuff like that, and make sure you're, consistently providing, high quality content and stuff like that.
Thanks for the comments and for being a listener. It means a lot. Yeah. And I know exactly what you mean. Like I just like everyone, right? Like I am different people on different days with this. Like I just recently advised a friend who's interested in getting into podcasts, like not to do it a weekly. Don't sign up for weekly. And I'm like, but I do a weekly show. And I guess what I really meant was like, try to do a season at weekly, but don't commit to 52 weeks of a year, right. which is what we do is 52 weeks, partly because it can feel like a grind. And, but I love it so much that when COVID hit, we actually ended up doing 2 episodes a week for a few weeks during the early days of the pandemic and shutting down schools and colleges. So I have this 2 minds about it, because when things are going and when I have an episode I'm excited about, like I'm just like, let's do more. And then, there are definitely times where it's like, wow, it's like a constant beast to feed, and you have to really stay on it. And and like you said, if you're trying to make sure that you keep up your quality, which I know we all do, you don't want to put out something that's not good. I totally, every time I hear, I listen to a lot of podcasts. I definitely love podcasts. And, I hear people when they're like, oh, this one, the sound quality, like I almost didn't put it out, but I wanted to get it out because I'm excited about what was said. But, and I know exactly what they're talking about. Like I get all that internal angst, which part of me is like, maybe the average listener doesn't care, but I totally am right there with you of like that internal dialogue of like, well, we had this great conversation, but the wind was blowing on the microphone, or like I had this glitch, and I was like, I don't think it's like, it's like kind of hard to listen to if I'm honest with myself. So we are honestly trying to, in the last year especially, we've really tried to up our game with some investments in some microphones and some basics that we should have done even sooner. But we're really a shoestring operation, and so I can relate to so many folks out there that are in that same boat. And just trying to keep to sort of wrestle with that reality of the constant schedule and the technical things without having some team. I do have a team of reporters, which is amazing. The newsroom, I'm not the only one doing the podcast. As I mentioned, Becky is the other higher ed reporter. And we also have some wonderful episodes by Emily Tate, who I need to plug this week's episode, which just came out yesterday. We come out every Tuesday. And hers is this just really deep, fascinating story, interviews with 3 first-year teachers in the K-12 level who their first year teaching is when the COVID hit last spring. So, and they talked about what that was like, and the 3 people just end up having unexpected stories, and it's just really great. So I recommend people listening to that. My voice isn't on it, but we were excited to put that together. I think, how do I keep excited? We do like definitely have meetings and try to think of ways to really, how can we do something surprising, delightful, get a guest who people would be like, really? Or get into an issue that really gets people, to sort of say like, oh, I didn't know that. And so we have a series. Actually, can I talk about a series we're working on? It hasn't come out yet.
Ooh, yeah. Good teaser. Cause I think, just the way that you've gone about episodes to sort of, again, emphasize the points that you're making, like it's really powerful. Cause I think sometimes there'd be the temptation for like, to get almost like the quote unquote kind of like celebrities or the thought leaders where it's like, oh, well, let's talk about like the experience that teachers are having during this pandemic. And you could just get somebody to sort of pontificate where it's like, well, I think that students or teachers or whoever are having this experience actually like frontline in the classrooms. But like you said, like you got such a deep and nuanced and kind of really engaging kind of end product by like, well, let's actually talk to first year teachers. Like they have no context for what this even should look like in the first place. But then like, the reality was going through this unprecedented time. So like that was such a great way to go about it. And just having, oftentimes I think, you all take that sort of lens of like, well, let's kind of get more embedded versus sort of just like, oh, let's go to like, these thought leaders and think tanks and, those sort of things, which they have their place. But I think it is also really important, really valuable the way that, you're able to, get embedded with those things. But yeah, I guess whatever else, you're working on, it'd be really great to kind of just give that teaser for folks to keep an eye out for in their podcast streams.
Well, thanks. And honestly, the embedding is totally, it's like a setup, but you don't know this, but we are basically doing a 7-episode series starting in the fall. So starting in a week and a half. So very soon, if you subscribe to the EdSurge Podcast, you will start to get these in your feed. This is basically trying to cover this crazy fall, which earlier we joked, but joke is the wrong word, but we were sort of seeing this as like the plexiglass semester, because you've got so many places that are literally putting up these plexiglass shields and trying to teach in person, trying to make it healthy and safe despite this pandemic, this COVID virus invisibly lurking around us all. And so we basically have we're going to do this audio diaries series, and we found 6 professors and 6 students. It might be 7. We'll see how it all ends up. This is a fast-changing thing, where we are encouraging them to record on their iPhones audio snapshots of their lives as they go through this semester, the fall. And we'll be checking back with them throughout the term. And already we're seeing, surprises where people are, professors that are applying to they're being asked to teach in person, but they're actually lobbying against that and trying to get their situation changed. And there's already and some students who were moving into their apartment, literally moving in already, and because their campus is going back, but then they get an email saying, actually, all your specific classes are going online, so now they're moving back home. And so we've been surprised, even just being in conversation with these people who have signed up to do this amazing thing to do this brave thing and share their stories with us over the whole semester and with the audience. They are already having so many ups and downs even before the project starts. I mean, so I think it's going to be really interesting. And I'm also, I think it is really underlined for me how tough this semester is going to be, and how real it is for people, the navigating this health issue while trying to get some education done and while trying to help people build toward their goals.
Yeah, well, I'm going to be keeping an eye out for that. It looks really, it sounds very exciting, and just looks like it'll be something that a lot of folks will get a lot of value from, because I think it's such a tough dilemma for so many people involved of like well, we want to provide education for those who wish to seek it out and achieve their goals, but then it's like, well, there's risks involved. Is it worth the risk? And just so many variables there. But yeah, again, just trying to get sort of the raw kind of frontline insights as much as we can, and I just know that like these sort of things will be such like valuable cultural artifacts once whenever we kind of get a handle on this and are moving past it, just being able to be like, what was it like for people, in all these different aspects of life, during this current moment. So,
yeah, we hope so. I think that's exactly the spirit in which we're doing this. And I want to just say, and I've already had these conversations I've had a one-on-one conversation with the professors and students doing this, but, I've told them over and over again, we're not trying to get, we're not encouraging you to like do anything you wouldn't do anyway. So don't think you need to be that student in the classroom who's reporting on like the drama of being in the classroom. Like if you can get out of if you don't want to be in the classroom and you can get out of it, that's great. Tell us your story wherever that happens. And so some of this, we have people on the project that started out being online only, others who are going online only unexpectedly since we started the project. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be, this is going on. And so it's like, how do we honestly tell the story? And it's, I think people are excited to be part of it and help do that, because we all know how unexpected it is. I mean, this is kind of the calm before the storm.
Yeah. Which is like, just certainly, yeah, like appreciated from all the, folks that you're working with and talking to, just like that they can zoom out even just a little bit of like, okay, this is sort of just existentially like important to help tell this story so that people understand, what's going on. And certainly, obviously, they don't even know what's, coming around the bend. But yeah, it's great that they're, giving time and giving their insights. So, then I guess switching gears a little bit, I don't know if there's anything, certainly as we're all continuing to endure quarantine life and all that sort of stuff, if there's anything in terms of like, just always love hearing from people, the things that they're geeking out about, like the hobbies, the fandoms, the interests that you have, if there's new stuff that you've discovered or things that you've always been into that you'd want to just share out, and kind of what those hobbies and things kind of give to you and how they positively contribute to your life.
Yeah, no, I would say that for being here in Minnesota where I live, it's one of the things that this season, there's a place with extremes of like, everyone knows it for the cold winters. It also has these incredible summers that are just beautiful. And we've been fortunate so far that the timing has been such that it's been, we've been able to live our lives outdoors so much, as I think so many people listening to this are probably experiencing wherever they are. But it's been, kind of lovely weather to help make that happen. And so I think for me, it's really been, a camping trip with my family, and we're going on another one this weekend, and like, getting, being outside, just doing things like grilling more and meeting in the park with folks, has been really a recharging thing that I just, it's like hard to imagine that without that. I mean, it's been the one sense of like trying to have some normalcy, and when you're out hiking or fishing, it's possible to imagine for a second that you're not, that maybe, there isn't a pandemic going on, because you wouldn't have seen anyone that day anyway, or you wouldn't have been closer than 6 feet to a stranger that day. It is also, I think, there are ways in which I'm excited to like learn more about. That's not something I grew up doing, like camping, or not knowing much about. So it's been exciting to like learn and feel like, be with the kids doing that, and being in this space of like, just nature. So geeking out is probably the closest thing. It's not tech at all, but ordering the popcorn, the fire popcorn popper on Amazon so we can like make popcorn over the campfire, or borrowing these like pudgy pies, which apparently do you know what that is, Dustin?
I do not.
Pudgy pie? I didn't know. I think it's a Minnesota thing. It is a fantastic dessert, s'more-like thing, where you have this like, iron sandwich maker thing, basically, where you put bread and maybe like a canned cherry concoction that you pour in it, and then you just stick it in the fire. And as you can imagine, or throw in chocolate, or throw in whatever you want, you've got instant fire pie. And that is something that I got to try. It's awesome.
Well, that's what I love too. Because I mean, yeah, a lot of people will take it like, little gadgets or whatever. That's like what they're geeking out about. But like, we've sometimes had sort of the curveballs, and certainly now, a lot of people are finding sort of solace and comfort, nourishment in nature, since that's a place where you can, kind of achieve a little sense of normalcy more so than, going indoors for whatever activities folks might have done otherwise. But yeah, because I mean, like when you camp, it's like, you got to get all the gear, and just being able to like, do different things, with that. So yeah, I mean, it's cool just yeah, I mean, encountering new things and just sort of appreciating and yes, quote unquote, kind of geeking out about hiking and camping and nature and stuff. That certainly fits the bill. So I'm glad that you're able to take advantage of the beautiful weather that you have and everything. So I guess just otherwise though, I mean, perhaps while you're outdoors and just relaxing or anything like that, anything that you're reading or listening to, or, just any resources that you'd want to give a tip of the hat to that we can include in the show notes.
Oh, yes. So as I mentioned, podcasts, love them, listen to them a lot. And two of them that have been incredibly important for me in the last few months, or in the last few weeks rather, are the New York Times Rabbit Hole, which if you haven't heard of it, it's like don't stop your podcast, but like go listen to it as soon as you can. Rabbit Hole is by Justin Roos, who's pretty much their main tech correspondent. They're kind of tech culture person. And he does this, I don't remember how many episodes it is, 6 or 7 episode series that is about the YouTube algorithm kind of nominally, but in this way that I really admire. It is just this work of art as far as like looking at internet culture through like how algorithms shape our lives online and therefore our lives and the culture in ways that it starts off, YouTube clearly was designed to share, cat videos or whatever. And somehow it is now this incredible force that is spreading, ideas like QAnon, which somebody I think just won a primary yesterday that is a QAnon person. And so, I'm sure, it gets really big really quick as far as the implications, which is something that I think people sometimes have trouble like understanding the full impact of what, some even memes that are kind of light or happening, and they feel like they're happening on the fringe, but then end up having this outsized effect that really shapes all of us, whether we're involved with them or even know what that is or not. So I really recommend that. And then there's another one called The Last Archive by Jill Lepore. She's a New Yorker writer and a historian at Harvard. And she is, already she's just like somebody that her work I just admire so much just in the New Yorker. But The Last Archive is pretty new. And it's literally, it's kind of it's almost like a companion piece to The Rabbit Hole, which is, it's literally explores, as she puts it, how truth died, like who killed truth. And this idea of like, why are we having so much trouble these days as a society, kind of figuring out, sharing with people the facts, the things that are, the pandemic exists, and that, there certain things have happened and they end up getting to be political disputes, and you're like, wait, how? And her sense of like putting things in historical context and her very playful storytelling, it's just, I really recommend that one.
Yeah. Really interesting stuff. Yeah. I mean, cause that's like, yeah, I mean, certainly a lot to do, with the internet. So like you said, yeah, like kind of a companion piece to just sort of like the internet culture and how things, different pieces of content spread. Cause like, I think part of it is like, oh, well, I saw it on the internet, so it must be true. Like that continues to be kind of this like stubborn, I feel like adage for a lot of folks, but then just like, so many of the platforms just being like, well, we just don't want to be in the position of like moderating, so they're just like, we're just a platform. People can do whatever they want. We're not responsible for what people post. And it's like, well, I think you are a little bit. And they've slowly been inching towards that, which is like reassuring, but also is just like, they were never designed or intended to be a place where they would, Facebook or anywhere else needs to like hire all these like content moderator or whatever, so it's like they are doing it for that because I think they feel an obligation, but I don't know if they would ever like fully get into it. But then it's like, yeah, like these people who are like engaging with this very, relevant part of the current moment culturally for America, especially like, it's like people who are trying to influence election. Like, so there's so many implications of like, yeah, just a core piece of like you said, that kind of like tagline, which is like so intriguing of, just like, when did truth die, like on the internet and stuff, or like what role did the internet play in that and stuff. So I'll have to go check that one out as well. But yeah, so all really good stuff. And we'll wrap up here, hopefully on a less foreboding and perhaps a more optimistic note. So, because I think, you already teased something coming up with the podcast, which is really great. So, I mean, just anything else, like just kind of higher ed wise that you're like sort of hopeful for, optimistic about, or just anything else that you'd want to end the episode on, just to kind of leave things on an optimistic note.
There are obviously a lot of, people trying so hard. I think higher ed does get this rap of like, oh, they're not changing, or that somehow professors are sterile and distant. But that's, I think as people that spend time in higher ed, that's just, that's not the typical. Maybe you can find someone like that in every field. And so people are really, really care a lot, and people are trying really hard to make whatever happens this coming fall, as effective as it can be, and as safe as it can be. So I think there's that. I do want to say though, I feel like I almost feel like I'm excited in a way that's for something that's going to be hard for me and for everybody, I think, which is this conversation that is going on about social justice and the role of race and structural inequity. And I think that there's just so much right now that's dark and that people shouldn't ignore. And I don't think people are ignoring that. I think people are, if we can get a conversation, maybe in part because of the pandemic, as bad as it is, and tragedies like the killing of George Floyd, like I'm certainly interested in how that is causing a conversation. And historically, higher ed is a place where those kinds of conversations happen, and I think it is happening. It's just going to be a really different kind of conversation because of the pandemic, and frankly, us people not being able to be together. And so I guess it is an untested level, at least unfamiliar to people, I think, today, of like this level of like unrest. But I'm interested to see how that plays out, and what if people can kind of have conversations of, if we can get to honest conversations about what could change, what should change. Like, I think there's, I know people out there probably have very different thoughts of them, of their own beliefs, but I think, will some of those conversations be had is interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, because I think so many people just like assume that like progress just is sort of like this natural force that always happens. And it just is sort of like, just a fact of life that things will always just get better for everybody just because. But
that was an early internet narrative, right? Like that.
right.
The
Internet's
here, like that's the thing that's going to get us to the next level and like progress as a society. And we'll like, boom, we got this. And, that might end up being, but it's certainly been, not a straight line.
Well, no, and I think like the point that I want to make too is like it takes effort and thought and intention by so many people to like make society better and all those sort of things. We're seeing like unrest and sort of just this dissatisfaction with the status quo, and just sort of like us sort of sitting on our hands and not addressing these long overdue and persistent issues and stuff. So I think, the continued sort of upheaval of these, like, this inertia that we've had around, social justice and stuff. Yeah, I'm like optimistic that like just generally over the past, handful of years that people have felt more empowered and motivated to, let their voices be heard and do work that's important and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's like, it's disruptive, it's uncomfortable and all that, but like absolutely necessary, long overdue, and just, wanting to take the time to, like have those conversations and do the learning and put in the work and stuff. So certainly reasons to be optimistic there for sure, as much as, like you said, it's going to be, I think, like a rough time, like it's going to be like a tough process for a lot of people. But absolutely necessary. So,
and education has got a role. Yeah, education is going to play a role for sure.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, just thank you so much for, taking the time and sharing all that you did. It was really fascinating and just awesome for me to kind of hear from you and your story and the things that you're working on and have coming up here. So obviously we'll have ways to connect with you and the work that you're doing and everything that you mentioned down in the show notes. But thanks again so much for your time.
Thanks, Dustin. Really appreciate it. A pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast.